Hello my fellow Jeti users and welcome back to Harry's Jeti Clinic. I've got a little feast now for the glider guiders amongst you, specifically for electric soaring, because I was asked about putting throttle and butterfly or crow brake, if you like, or spoilers on the same stick. And the particular request I had was for the throttle to work from the stick at center forwards and the crow braking, butterfly or spoilers, whatever you have, to work from the stick at center backwards, and to have a little bit of voice files in there so that you know when you've switched one on or off. And I also thought you probably want a little bit of a dead zone in there as well, especially as you're moving the rudder. You might not keep exactly at the same level, and you don't want the brakes or the motor coming on. And it then occurred to me, I bet there's another way we could set this up as well, which would be that the throttle would work over the entire range of the stick. So stick back, no throttle, stick forward, full throttle, and then operate a two-position switch when you've got the throttle all the way back, so that it would then work as your braking control, moving all the way forward. Not the direction that I like. I like my brakes to work as you pull the stick back. So we'll go on to look at option 3, a real nice bit of programming, I think, where the two-position switch allows you to have the throttle working the normal way and your brakes working by pulling the stick back from the top, and yet they don't intrude on one another. You don't have to go to full throttle to switch it over to pull the brakes back, or you don't have to have the brakes out to be able to switch it over to have the throttle at idle. Anyway, we'll go through it in these 3 episodes. So let's go into the first of them, which will be the throttle at mid does nothing, or the stick at mid does nothing. Pushing it forward gives you throttle all the way up to full power, and from mid position pulling it backwards gives you progressive crow braking. So the first thing we'll do is create our little model. New model, we'll give it a name, AA, we'll call it type aero. I'm going in from this just so you can see that I'm not doing anything pre-prepared hidden behind the scenes. You will see absolutely everything. So we've got our 2 flaps to wheel so we can have the crow braking. We know that Jeti defaults to having a throttle, so that's fine. As always, if you're doing crow braking, do not have a flap control. Clear it out. The reason being, we're going to assign the control in the crow butterfly menu. And if you have it working the flaps as a control in here as well, then the control that you have in here is going to be trying to work the flaps as well as the butterfly menu trying to work the flaps, and they'll either fight against one another or they'll add up and double up the rate of doing things. So just don't have any flaps here, but we need it in there so that it will assign flap servos for us in the next screen, and that the butterfly crow recognizes you've got flaps. Okay, on we go. I'm very quickly just going to reassign these. You don't need to. I'm doing it purely so that we can watch the screen more easily when we get to setting things up. So you can see that this line gives us our 2 flap servos and this line gives us our 2 aileron servos. Just that bit easier to watch. Activate, yes, no, we don't want that. Okay. Right, first things first, let's deal with the throttle. We go in here, go into fine tuning. In fact, no, we'll jump into advanced properties first. And I'm going to go to the sound of proportional controls. I'm going to activate that, move the throttle stick, say OK. Mode, I'm going to say center beep. Okay, now the reason is I've now got a nice little center point. If I move the stick up to about the middle, you'll hear it beep. There we go. I now know that the throttle stick's in the middle. And remember, we wanted this to be a setup where from middle forward is throttle, middle backward is brake, so it's handy to have that little beep just to tell us we're there. We might get rid of it because we're going to put in voice files, but for the moment it's handy just to have it there to help us. So first thing I'm actually going to do is assign the voice files to it. And if we assign those at the point where we want the motor to start working or the brakes to start working, that gives us a nice reference for setting up all the offsets in the actual programming later on. So let's go ahead and do that. We go to Advanced Properties, Sounds on Event, pardon me, Add. The first one is going to be, I'll move the throttle stick, I'll move, it's P4. I shouldn't call it throttle stick because it's going to be a throttle, it's going to be a brake, it's really just widget P4. So widget P4, say proportional. Now, put the throttle where you want it to be when the motor actually starts running. I'll say there. Press this button here and that will assign the switch point to wherever the stick actually is. There we go. Switched on 17%. Away from neutral. Remember, neutral midpoint is 0%, so plus 17 is up there. I think that's maybe a little bit far. Of course, the higher we make this, the bigger the deadband's going to be, but also the much more aggressive the throttle is going to open in the very little space that's left. Also consider this. Any speed controller I've ever had has a deadband built in at the bottom. It can vary a little bit, but you usually have to open the throttle a couple of clicks before the motor starts running. So we probably don't need to build in much of a deadband here. Nevertheless, I am going to, just to show you what we can do. And then you can adjust the actual deadband, if any, that you build in, depending on how your own speed controller reacts. Because some of them, one click of throttle stick open and they're running. Some of them I find, 3 or 4 and they're running. So what I'm going to do now is manually adjust that back to 10% by rotating the programming dial anti-clockwise. There we go, switched on 10%. And if I move the stick forward of it, it's on. If I move the stick back, it's off. So that gives us a point there where we can assign the motor on voice file. So okay, I'm going to here. We'll get there eventually. There we are, motor on. Lovely. Now let's do the same thing again, but the same switching point, but working in the opposite direction, and put in the motor off file. So add, once again, wiggle P4, say it's proportional, take it up to around that switching point.
Motor on.
What did we say it was? 10%. Okay, you probably find that there's a little bit of difference between the 2 points switching on and off. If you, like me, you've got a throttle with the ratchet on it, because you don't get exact smooth movement. It jerks little steps. But anyway, okie doke. Now, this is going to be when we're bringing the throttle stick back. We want it to tell us the motor is off. So we want it to activate as we're coming downwards. So we don't want it switched on up here. We want it switched on down there. So we say reverse this time. And now as we pull the stick back, when it passes the point, it goes on. In which case we can say, ooh, I think I've gone too far. There we are, motor off. Lovely. So now if I push the stick forward, it'll switch on that one and say motor on.
Motor on.
And if I pull the stick back a little bit, it'll switch on the second one and say motor off.
Motor off.
And there's that center beep at the same time. But that's okay. So you'll probably realize that you've come back off the power anyway. But you might need to play around just with the switching points a little bit.
Motor on.
Because
Motor off.
So it could just be because I've got a ratchet. But there we are anyway. So
motor
that's
on. Motor off. Motor on. Motor off.
Lovely. Now what we're going to add is just the other side of that, the center point, telling us that the brakes are on or off. So off we go again. Once again, P4.
Motor off.
Proportional. Which way is it going? This one is going up the way.
Motor on. Motor off. Motor on. Motor off.
Switch on at 100. Ah, right. That's what we want. So put the stick to about there. Switching point is there, -9. Lovely. We'll say switching at -10. So if I pull the stick back, it's off. Push the stick forward, it switches on. So that will be the brakes off as we're moving the stick forward. So somewhere up here. Brakes off. And finally, same thing again.
Motor, brake off.
Proportional, come back to about here, minus 16, manually adjust that up to minus 10. And now reverse it this time so that it switches on as we come backwards. It's switched off up there.
Motor off.
Okay, and we can see brake on. Okay, right, at last. So I've got this P4 stick all the way back, which would be at full brake. So as I move it forward, it should get near to the middle and say brake off. As I keep moving forward, it should then say motor on.
Brake off. Motor on.
Lovely. P4 all the way forward. Now as I bring it back, it should tell us the motor's off, get the centre beep, and then keep coming back, it'll say brake on.
Motor off. Brake on.
There we go. Right, let's make those actually work now. Where are we? Right, let's deal with the throttle first of all. If we have a look at the servo monitor, throttle is
Motor
working,
on.
of course,
Brake on.
over the full range. What we want to do is we'll go into function curves, into throttle, change it to a 3-point, come down here, go to the midpoint, and bring that down to minus 100. And there we are. So the stick at the moment is all the way back. Here you see I'm moving up to half stick, no throttle's happening, and now
motor on.
You get throttle in that last bit.
Motor off.
Now, as I said, the speed controller may well give you a bit of a dead band as you're coming up here anyway for a couple of clicks. Or it might just be one click because, of course, we've got such a steep curve now.
Motor off.
If you need to move this and get a better dead band, move that point actually sideways by using either of these buttons here. So if you see, if I hold this down, you see we can move the point all the way along there.
Motor on.
And get a phenomenally steep curve. But that effectively gives you your dead band from the center point.
Motor off.
Bring it back to here. So we'll put it, I'll put it back to the middle because I say I'll assume, well, I would check my speed controller has a bit of a dead band anyway. But tell you what, we'll leave it out there a little bit just for the sake of the demonstration. Okay, and that has given you straight away your throttle just from the midpoint. So we'll say OK to that. Let's have a look at servo monitor. I'll pull P4 all the way back,
brake on,
which would be full brake. I'll bring P4 up to the middle. Note that our throttle is locked in the off position.
Brake off. Motor on.
There we go. Move just as I said, motor on. So just in the top half there.
Brake on.
Say OK to that. OK to that. And very importantly, advanced properties, other model options, throttle cut. You can still choose your throttle cut switch, which I shall do. OK. OK to that. And if I now look at the servo monitor, I'll move P4 up and down.
On. Brake on.
So our throttle cut switch is still working beautifully.
On.
So we can move throttle on, and there we go.
Brake on. Brake off. Motor on. Motor off.
Lovely. Okay, so all we need to deal with now is the crow braking. And back into fine tuning. Sorry if I keep calling it crow braking, folks. That's the term we tend to use in Britain rather than butterfly, but crow braking, butterfly are the same thing, just two different words for it. The control will be, of course, P4.
Motor on. Brake on. Motor on.
But for me, we want to reverse it.
Motor on.
We'll find out in a second. I think I want it reversed. But anyway, we'll do that. And this is the one that we'll use to stop it working in the top half. The offset is going to be 50%. Well, 50% would mean that the crow brake will not work until we've moved the stick halfway back. But again, we want a little bit of a deadband. We want it to be a little bit beyond halfway back. So let's call it 55% so that we get a bit of a deadband. Come down here, adjust our ailerons. I'm going to give them ridiculous travels, of course, just for the sake of easily seeing them in the demonstration. Oops. Obviously, you choose the values you want. Say OK to that. Now let's have a look in servo monitor, and we've got the brake is in the motor bit, as I suspected, so we'll say OK. We come up P4 and reverse it. Say OK to that. Now let's look in servo monitor. Right, the stick's all the way forward, so we've got full throttle. I'll start pulling the stick back.
Motor off.
And indeed, we've got motor off. You heard the little beep, we're at the middle. Now I'll start pulling the stick back into the brake region. Watch the ailerons on that line and the flaps on that line.
Brake on.
Lovely. And now...
brake off.
And then keep going forward.
Motor on. Brake on.
Okay. Now let's just prove that using the throttle lock switch will not affect a butterfly. There we go. Throttle lock is on. So
brake motor on.
Even though it says motor on, throttle lock is on. Throttle's locked in the off position.
Motor brake on.
Our butterfly is working as required, and our ailerons, which are these two, are still working as required in all possible states. So there you go. That's how to get that one to work. I'll see you for episode 2, at which we'll look at using the full range of the stick for each of them with a 2-position switch.